Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another Brand Pollinators community call. Today, we're talking about event activations and sponsorship. And we have a guest, Karen, who is the founder of Sponsor Motion here with us today. So if you don't know about our community calls, we do a monthly call with a guest expert. And we also do a weekly email with insights for founders of impact brands. So we really love being able to connect founders to each other and find opportunities to help founders make a bigger impact in any way that we can. So we're excited to bring Karen today because she works with Better For You brands and does a lot of promotional opportunities at events, typically healthcare and sporting events. And so over the past 20 years, she has a ton of experience with sales, operations, and a lot in partnership development. She also teaches communications and consultative sales at BU's Questrom School of Business. And so she lives in Boston with her family. And thank you so much, Karen, for coming today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that introduction. It's super exciting to be able to connect with you and this community, because I think there's so much good that comes out of the Better For You brands and the B Corps that really pushes the world forward, particularly after we're coming out of Earth Day, right? I think that's all top of mind.
For sure. Yeah, I know. And it's just like, yeah, it's so interesting to figure out like how we can connect these brands and how we can reach consumers that are going to support these brands. So just to start off, like, what would you say you consider sponsorship when you're talking about events and how brands can interact with things like that?
Yeah. So when I first started in this business, one of the things that was the most confusing to the folks I was talking to was the word sponsorship. Sponsorship often means mentorship. It means things like sponsorship in terms of a visa. It's sponsorship in terms of events, nonprofits, you name it. In the context that I work in, I define it very broadly in the way that sponsorship equals partnership, right? You're looking to achieve mutually advantageous goals with a communal audience or a consistent audience. So brand X and organization Y get together because they're both looking to reach the same folks with a benefit message that is consistent with the event or the goals of the audience. And
Mhm.
let me juxtapose that against, sponsorship for sponsorship's sake, which is simply a transactional relationship. I'm going to give you money and you do what you want with it. The activation piece of it is what makes it different, right? This is sponsored by X organization that, is looking to achieve a goal that the consumer wants. In the case of sporting events and healthcare, which are two very, very disparate industries, right? They're both looking at bettering outcomes, right? The health and wellness of people, patients, communities as a whole. So when we think about sponsorships for races, road races or marathons, right? It's because we're cheering on a community, right? It's because we're trying to sell a product, right? Like a sports shoe, a running shoe, a blister tape, a sunscreen, you name it, that helps the performance of the runner. Or in the case of, say, a community 5K, right? It's all about the community. The people are constantly looking for options for banking, for cell phones, for insurance, right? So how do you reach those consumers in a meaningful way, right? We want to help you. Here's some information. We're here to support you in your activities. It's really about bringing a community together and helping them achieve goals in a meaningful way.
No, I'm glad you clarified that because I think it is a lot of times it just looks like a logo is slapped on to, the finish line banner or whatever. And yeah, maybe not as intentional a connection as it could be. And so, yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense to focus on how it's mutually beneficial and supporting those bigger goals and the bigger community. That's really cool.
Yeah. I would say the logo slaps are probably the least effective if you're a small brand, right? Because it's almost like a one and done thing. What you're looking to as, you're building a brand and connecting with a consumer is really those meaningful and authentic relationships or interactions. And that's part of the magic around like an exhibit table, a farmer's market, a booth, right? Some sort of thing that's Instagrammable. Um, if you have big budgets and that's part of your brand strategy is to own share of mind, then you can spend a lot of money and put your logo in different places.
Mm-hmm.
But the real value for most brands is actually in the interaction.
Mm-hmm. And so we talked about this a little before we started recording, but like when it's a small brand, how do you like know how much to spend, or how do you justify that? Because like Andrea was saying, you can spend a lot to get to an event, but then what's that follow up, or how do you see what your return is?
No, it's a real problem. Number one, like you choose wisely. And I think like that's the hardest thing to do. Many folks choose events and event sponsorships because it seems like a good idea at the time. Oh, we should definitely be there, or our competition's there, or you know what, let's try it and see what happens. But it's not necessarily always part of a marketing plan. So when you think about why you would invest in an event, it's number one to get product in people's hand, right? So like I'm putting cans in hands, I'm getting samples into bags. I want to hear from the consumer what they think of it. And I want to take that feedback into account as I'm developing my product.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it's to get email capture, right? Or to drive sales. And if you're doing that, then it's part of, again, the broader marketing plan, where you're looking to actually drive sales and drive your customer base. At which point, all the tactics that we all talk about all the time, which around email, digital, and physical marketing in store and out of store, come into play. So whatever your funnel is going to be, it's going to have to play into that versus being a one-off. And then number three, it's to create a magical moment or an interaction with a consumer that's completely memorable. This is probably most prevalent at things like marathons, 5Ks, or really large fairs or community events where people are going to have a good time and then take something home to remember you by.
Mm-hmm.
The key is, and I think this gets at one of the questions Andrea was asking, is to actually think about an event not as a point in time, but as a pre, during, and post. So that you, before the event, you're doing a campaign. Come see us, come see us, come see us, sign up here, come see us, come see us, come see us, because it's a newsworthy event, right? Or you're doing teasers, right? Come see what we have to reveal. Then all the social during the event, and then the plan for the follow-up with the folks that you interacted with after the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
that makes so much sense, because it's not just that one day. You want to like draw people in. And I know this about just hosting events and things too, like finding some people that are going to buy in before you even get started, so that it's like you see a friendly face there, like you have somebody coming.
Yeah.
And to that point, I mean, I think focusing on maybe like smaller or more niche events seems like that would make sense for a smaller brand, because it gives them the opportunity for more face time. I mean, what would you say, that is it better to go for like a bigger event with more people, or like a smaller event that maybe has like better interaction?
Well, I mean, I think again, it goes back to the goals of the event. A small brand at a big event is going to get washed out by definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a bit of an arms race. Now, a small brand at a big event that does something really innovative, that gets a lot of social presence, is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there a couple of years ago, there was a brand at Expo West that I think walked around with a sandwich board on.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't afford a booth. They couldn't afford, something. And so essentially their advertising was themselves. They got so much press. It was a brilliant, authentic idea that people could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's about really making the most of what you have. Like if you're going to the event anyway, right? Then why not wear t-shirts with your name on it? We used to put QR codes on the back of a t-shirt. So like with a cute little saying, like click here, to learn more. And people would be taking pictures of, the backs, and the QR code would lead them to the website. Smart, clever activations go way further than a boring, small activation that costs a lot of money. So it's about being kind of clever in that situation, and going back to your goals, right? So if you want to get into, if you're at Expo West and you want to get into, let's say, Whole Foods, right? Target your activation that way. Be really super specific and go all in. If you're really looking to just get feedback from customers, go small. Have those authentic conversations. Talk to everybody you can talk to. And do it in a meaningful way, because that's going to reap you dividends as you grow.
Yeah, and I'm like just thinking of all these cool things that you could do. And even, we've talked about this before too, like getting some brands to team up, because if you're a smaller company, like maybe you can split the cost of, doing some kind of sponsorship or doing some kind of clever activation like that, where you might need to pull a couple different resources together to make it happen, but that could be like a really cool thing.
It could be so much fun too. I think that's like part of what makes events so fun, is that like you can be as creative as you want to be. Like the goal here is old school traditional like marketing fun, like stuff people don't do anymore. Like you get beyond the HubSpots and the funnels and the sequences, and you're like, what's going to make us stand out? And you can just like throw ideas out there and like bring in all the goofiness, because when folks are at events, like there's so much boring, right? Like not necessarily like during the race, but it's like sea of sameness. So here's your opportunity to really break through the clutter in the crowd and do something so that you're memorable and that you stand out. And pro tip, bring somebody to photograph it, because that's your social content.
Exactly. Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I think like having that be in alignment with your mission and kind of the brand vibe that you have is important too, because, another expo example, like I've seen companies that just kind of do some big splashy thing, but it's like, what is that? Like, how is that related to your product? Where on the other hand, like this year, Liquid Death they were serving out of a coffin, and like, that makes sense. Like death is in their name, so it's like that kind of stuff. It makes more sense with the brand and the vibe that you're going for. And I think when it comes to like impact driven brands, we don't want to create more junk. And so it's not about like, giveaways and having like some goofy thing to give away to people, because it could, it's just going to get tossed out.
Yeah, and it creates more waste. And really, you go to these events, right? And you expect to come home with swag. Like, what do you really keep? Like, you don't keep another keychain. You probably aren't going to keep another koozie. What are you going to keep that's useful and memorable and connects back to the brand, right? I'm still using some of the tote bags I've had because they're just good tote bags, right? And you walk around with the name on it. The lanyards, a dime a dozen. Would never, ever invest in that unless you're like a giant brand just slapping your logo everywhere, right? Or you're new and you need to like, you're maybe a locksmith. I don't know. Like there's some fun things you can do. But like, as you're thinking about like the swags, the leave behinds, what's clever, what fits, what's going to get used versus tossed? Or do you really need to put something out there for people to take, right? Is there a better way to draw them in? Is there an activity? Can they plant a tree? Can they plant a flower? And then you can actually get them and their emails, right? So that they can stay in touch about whatever it is they're doing. I went to a conference a few weeks ago, and there was a raffle, right, to win free coaching sessions or whatever they were giving away. Of course I won. I think everybody won, right? People love contests. They love prizes. They love to compete. I remember working with a brand that had like a cornhole game at an event, right? Because people would sit there and play cornhole, right? It wasn't just about one and done. And that was in a busy expo center. So like, when we think about places like, just Chicago Marathon Expo, where there are thousands of people, right? It's about bringing them in so they come back, and that you've got the crowd of people around the booth so they don't want to leave. It's not just one and done. Uh,
Mhm. And I'm
Again,
just
this is where the creativity comes into play.
yeah.
This is just a simple transactional exchange. Here's your table, here's your booth, come and go.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about like with the cornhole, I mean, if you have that space, then you can control the branding that's in that space and the visuals and whatever they're exposed to in that space too.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Or
really
the
great.
Plinko wheels, or the spins, like there's all sorts. I've seen people waiting hour-long lines for the spins or the face painters or
Mhm.
whoever's coming through. If you're at a outdoor event that's family friendly, anything that draws the kids in,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
then the parents have to come along and they stand there. And
Stand
they
there.
stand there for and then you can work those lines, right? Up and down.
Yep, genius. Yeah. And so one of the other things I was just thinking of too is like, what about like if it's a product that you're sampling, then could you then ask people like, we're doing a survey and we're going to use your input for a new flavor, or is there like would that make sense to kind of engage people in more like maybe product development or something kind of more invested with the brand?
Absolutely. Everybody loves to give an opinion. Vote for the next flavor, right? The
Mhm.
winners get, a free whatever you want to give away, a free
Mhm.
box of it, or you sign up to be on our panel of taste testers.
Yeah.
Whether or not you follow through with that, right? You're still getting people signed up, opted in, which
Mhm.
ultimately is your goal for follow through. Vote on our next flavor. Which brand should we have collaborations with? Who do you love? Think about these things as information gathering so you can
Mhm.
also start to really develop out your target persona and your target persona likes, as well as potential partnership options.
Mhm.
Which, going back to your question around like a small brand, right? Like the best and easiest way to expand your reach and reach more people is to buddy up
Mhm.
with either like a complementary brand or a brand that's kind of like-minded.
Mhm.
So like shoes and socks, hot dogs and mayonnaise, bring in your people. No product is used in isolation.
Mhm.
So there are adjacent brands that are non-competitive. And if somebody's buying a hot dog, the chances are they're buying a bun and they need a ketchup and a relish and whatever. That's, the 3-packs now.
Mhm.
Not just one product, but 3 products. And so once you buddy up, right, then you can do different kinds of activations, bigger activations at a lower shared cost for each brand,
Mhm.
right? Not to mention you've now doubled your reach,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Because both brands are like activating on their own target audiences with their own email platforms and social platforms.
Well, and that pre and post action then happens in multiple channels as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the more common things I'm seeing now are these boxes of like goodies where people are doing like sign up and get a box, right? And so, I see a lot of brands flocking. I need to be put in this box. I need to be put in this wellness box. I need to be put in this cold weather box or this gift box. I love those. Same concept applies at events,
Mhm.
right? I do a lot of work in women's health, right? So like women of a certain age, are looking for newer kinds of products that they may not have done before. There's all sorts of new products out there, and they're facing this problem that how do I actually get through to women? Because there's no women's health aisle in the drugstore, right?
Mm.
So, postpartum mothers are in the baby aisle and like older people are in the, pain aisle.
Mhm.
You have to kind of shop by need. So how do you get the word out? Like, how does somebody know how to look for a new and innovative product?
Mhm.
Um, and this is how, right? You partner with another brand so that you get a whole new basket of products, very similar to what they do in the beauty industry. get a free sample, go do this with some of the bigger things, but you're doing it at an event. So like if you're giving away, you know, a recovery drink, then you're giving away, you know, maybe the blister tape at the same time, right? So it's all in the same little box. Then people can go, look at this cool little bag of goodies I got.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. And I'm always a huge advocate for that, trying to find those complementary brands that would go well together to kind of cross promote. Oh, what we have a comment here. Tried to do a recovery zone USA Triathlon. They would, but then went with that idea and they tried to charge more for any brand that wanted to participate in the zone. Okay.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
Andrea, like I work with a lot of these organizations, and
yeah,
there's an art to it, an art to
yeah,
negotiation.
yeah.
That's
They like
probably all I
basically
can say. You have to be super
went with
careful with
our
those ideas.
yeah, went with our idea, and then they're like, okay, well now if you want to participate in the recovery zone, it's X amount of dollars, and like I can't. I mean, that's what we were trying to do, is get a bunch of brands like our product is great for helping with recovery after the race, and so, or getting ahead of recovery pre-race.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they went with that, and then I'm like, okay, well we can't afford another $3,000 for the recovery zone, so I guess we'll just make do. So yeah,
Yeah.
so
It's funny. You should feel very honored, because a good idea always gets copied. I mean,
sure learned my lesson on that one.
learned your lesson. Yeah.
Mhm.
Another kind of like event practice is to really keep what you're planning on doing under wraps until you
Yeah.
get to that point where you do the big
Yeah.
reveal.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the ship has sailed and there will be no copycats.
Right.
It's really, I think especially for small brands in a crowded space, it's tough to find the white space.
Yeah.
Right? The white space often comes from the founder and from the brand personality. Like if you listen to the case study of Liquid Death, I think they were just on How I Built This. I don't know if any of you have listened to that. The
Haven't
way
listened to
they
that
built
one, but
brand, well, it should be required listening for most founders, to be honest. He's ex-agency. The insights upon which he built that brand is exactly how brands should be built. And it happens so rarely, like most brands, and it's because like brands are kind of organic, right? Most brands are built on just like, here's a good idea, right? I'm going to call it this. But he did it in a very scientific, methodologically sound way, where that's why you see kind of the consistency across everything. There's a brand story, the coffin idea, the heavy metal kind of references, all inspired by the origin story of the brand. Now back to the idea that like most brands kind of develop organically, you see it reflected in their marketing, and they struggle for the ideas because they're starting with like, well, what should we do versus what is our brand about? If you start with what is our brand about, it'll lead you to an exploration of different activations. When you start with, well, what should we do? That's where the copycats come in.
Yep.
Right. And that's how the hallmark of a copycat brand is like, I'm going to just take what somebody else did and do it over here because it worked for them. So why wouldn't it work for us? It means that you just have to be super careful with what you do and how you do it. And whatever you do, you need to own. And again, that's where that idea of authenticity comes into play, and being yourself and really making sure you create those moments in any interaction with your consumer.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that concept of like, what should we do versus what we're about. And it is rare because, a lot of people are just saying, okay, what should we do? And then that's where the copycats come from, because they are looking for ideas without looking within about what they're about. And so, yeah, easy to have people steal your ideas because there's so many out there that are just looking for like a gimmick, a thing to do. So yeah, in order to be authentic with those experiences, you have to really think about who you are and how you're going to be as a brand, how you're going to show up.
Yeah. And I think most importantly, how you're going to make people feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the feeling you want them to leave with? Like, oh my God, what a great idea. I love this product. I love this brand. I'm going to go buy it. Because
Mm-hmm.
then money and competition and any other variable becomes irrelevant because it's an irrational decision that's emotionally based versus, oh, wait, which bottle of canned water should I buy? Like, what's cheapest today?
Mm-hmm.
What you want to do is elevate above the features to get to the emotion. So it's a no-brainer. Well, this one makes me feel good, so I'm going to buy this one.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be your brand. When you start with the gimmicks and the promotions and all the other stuff, which do work, I'm not discounting it. You start to get into almost like a commoditized market with a race to the bottom because
Mm-hmm.
there's so much competition. Where small brands really need to play is in the emotional world, developing those connections and making it a must-have product for you and your consumer because it's that good, that different, and that feeling is irreplaceable and frankly not able to be copied.
Yep. So true. So on the other hand, based on what we were just talking about, how can brands measure the success of what they've done at an event or an activation? Like if it's like an emotional play, like what are some of the ways that they can measure that ROI from that investment?
Well, it's really difficult to measure ROI at an event. I started my career trying to answer that question. I would say don't.
Yeah.
And like it takes 7 or 8 touches, depending on the data source you're looking at, to
Or
actually make
22.
or 22 or 3,000 in some
Yeah.
cases, to make a sale, right? You got to hit a consumer when they're ready to purchase. So when you think about how do you measure ROI, the question I like to ask is before the event is what do you hope to get out of this event? Which takes you back to your marketing goals. Do I want opt-ins, right? Do I want to get feedback from customers? Do I want to get, social mentions? Do I want social content? So if you start with that, before you even buy the activation, then it actually gives you much clearer direction on what you want to do with the activation and what goal you're going to have for the activation. So let's say you want social, you're going to optimize around the activation itself and the like memorability and the visibility and creating those Instagrammable moments with people. Maybe it's a photo booth, maybe it's a selfie wall, maybe it's something else, right? Like your goal is going to get things on social. If it's to get opt-ins, same thing, right? Like what is the activation that's going to get people to sign up? Like stay tuned, be in the know, like get a coupon, click this QR code and automatically register. Or if it's feedback, right? Like how many people do I want to talk to? And then you make that happen. So I think the ROI piece is tricky and entirely dependent on where you're at and why you're investing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Van's a brand ambassador, which I've worked with her in the past.
Okay.
And she's asking, what are your thoughts on mass distribution of coupons at events? Because clearly that there's a connection there in terms of tracking like what people are using.
Well, I think it's not bad.
Yeah.
I think people there's a whole segment of this country that loves coupons. They love a deal. They love they love a discount, whatever. Like I'm way more likely to buy something if there's a coupon than not, right? Like, oh, well, it's 15% off. So I think it's a good tactic. I always like joke, like I walk around at events with a bag. I throw everything in the bag and when I come home, I sort through it. And so if that's the type of event you're going to, and there are people walking around with the bags going from booth to booth, then absolutely. If you're at like a large event, like let me take, a music festival, right? It may be a little more challenging because people aren't necessarily going booth to booth, right? They're like picking up coupons and collateral and things to look at later. So you may want a different kind of activation to get that coupon code to people at that point. You may want to give away with like a coupon code on the giveaway that they can use at the event. So Van, I think it's a little bit about, again, like where you're at and what you want to achieve. I will say couponing, discounting, there's an entire world of thought around pricing. That seems to suggest that once you start down that path, it's difficult to get anybody to buy something full price. So when we go down the couponing, discounting route, I always caution brands to think about it bigger, to make sure you're not training customers to look for the discount.
Yeah. I know personally, there's some brands that I like only buy when they're on discount.
I mean, think about it, Gap, Macy's, Banana Republic, a lot of the clothing brands, there's no reason. But then I look at other brands like Vuori never goes on sale. And I would absolutely go in there and buy something full price because I know that. Many of the higher end, like ready to drinks, like the canned drinks, same thing, like the non-alcoholics, they don't go on sale that often. If ever, like I'll buy those full price. Wines, liquors, it's the 15% discount from the distributor or the store that I'll use. But don't hesitate to buy the beverage at full price.
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned the music festivals, because we're actually working with a field marketing team right now that's doing a booth at a big music festival this summer. And they're just like pulling in a bunch of brands, and they're going to do all kinds of different giveaways and a variety of products. So I'm curious to see how that goes, because I think it's a family friendly event. And so I think that it's going to be a really good opportunity for people to get in front of, these music festival goers and families. But yeah, I'm curious, like there's a lot of different types of products that we're going to include, and some are coupons and some are products and some is swag. So yeah, it could be cool.
I mean, so I love music festivals for distribution reasons. People stay for a long time. They go back to the same booths, the ones they like, multiple times. They need products at that moment that they didn't think they would need, or they may have forgotten. I love putting sunscreens at music festivals, because you will see people, they think they're invincible, and then, oh my God, all of a sudden they're not.
Bright red.
Hats are always a great seller. All sorts of lotions, balms, lip stuff, you name it. And flip-flops, because feet hurt after a while. So there's a whole bunch of cool tie-ins for music festivals, but I think like when this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, like, how do I choose an activation? Well, like if you look at a 5K, right? Like people are lounging around after the 5K in any community on any given weekend, and they're there for maybe an hour, hour and a half, right? Max, especially if there's food. You look at a music festival, you've got somebody captive for like hours.
They're like camping overnight.
Yeah. I mean, I worked with, racing brands, like the car race may be on Sunday, but at the same time, like there are people tailgating for 3 days.
Yeah.
It's an event. And so, when you think about where you're going to show up and how you're going to show up, especially as a smaller brand with limited people, right? You can't be everywhere at once. You'll die. Like you'll just burn by events. Like it won't work. Choose strategically where it's going to get you the biggest bang for your buck. Like, is it a weekend at a music festival where you're there, like really interacting? Or is it, let me do 5K a month, right? In different locations around the country. Or, you know what? My big thing is going to be like the city marathons. I'm going to go from New York to, Boston to London. And I'm going to activate big time. There's a bit of a balancing act, right? You don't want to do too much. You don't want to do too little. You absolutely can't do everything. So it's looking at all the different variables versus just taking them as they come.
And to that point, I mean, if it's a small company and it's usually like the founder going to these events, like, what are your thoughts on having someone else represent your brand, or how much of that stuff do you have to do yourself? Like, because you said, I mean, there's going to be burnout if you try to do a certain amount.
Yeah, I think it depends on your brand and your brand story, number one, and number two, what you're hoping to achieve. Like if you're just trying to get product in hands, by all means, outsource it, right?
Mm.
That you see the Red Bull trucks, the, you know, or the one, I forgot the one that had, all the like women wearing skimpy outfits, right? Um, there's proven tools of the trade that get product in hand is what I'm trying to say. Use those. If you're trying to get feedback, input, you should be there, right? There's no one can sell your brand like you. If you have a complex brand, right? And I run into this often in healthcare. Um, it's tough to get somebody off the street with no training to be able to sell your brand appropriately in a short period of time, which is where you might want to invest in a fractional or a dedicated type salesperson for those types of things. And there's some professionals who do it, and there's some agencies who can outsource it fairly easily. It's going to cost you money, but at the same time, you have to look and say, well, is that return? And this is where ROI does come in. The return on the investment for that person going to pay off? Can they do it better than I can? Or can they save me time, which is usually the more of a problem? I need the time. Can they save me enough time where it doesn't make sense for me to do this?
Yeah. And I mean, I know Van's on the call. I've worked with her in the past. Amazing. And she's based in Charlotte. So it's like, okay, if there's something happening in that area, then, you know, you don't have to be traveling there. And, you know, there's other savings that come into play too.
For sure. For sure. Geography is huge. You know, I am shocked sometimes at the difference in the cost of events in major markets versus secondary markets. A New York versus Atlanta is obvious, but how about an LA versus an Orange County? And arguably your Orange County people may be worth more for a shelf-stable brand. You know, you have to kind of look and say like, okay, so maybe I can't afford New York, but I can afford Long Island. You know, I work with a group out of Chicago, and they've blanketed the Chicago suburbs with 5Ks. Like you can buy out all the 5Ks in Chicago without ever setting foot inside the city limits, reaching, you know, your Costco shopper or, you know, your Ralph shopper. I think Ralph's is no, Mariano shopper. You know, that's in that area fairly easy and cost effectively. So, you know, Kansas City's terrific for running races. They've got an entire organization. North Carolina, Van, you know, North Carolina well. There's tons and tons and tons of festivals and events that go on there. You could be busy every single day and spend a quarter of the money you would spend in like a New York, a Miami, or an LA.
Yeah. So, okay, Van's saying participate in events that are near where your product is sold. Such a good point. In that music festival that we're pulling in product for, that was the first thing that the marketing team did, was look at all the retailers within like a mile radius of that event and say, okay, if you have product in these retailers, this is like a good place to be, because you can easily follow up, you know, with people right in that same place.
Not to mention the retail data will show your lift. So if you're really looking for those ROI numbers, that's the best way to do it. And there's products out there that do it automatically that you can subscribe, like tech products that'll track it at different retailers. So you don't have to wait for the retailer numbers. They just pull it in automatically. The other way, when you think about it, if you're going to do that type of strategy, is what can I do in retailer for promotion at that point too? Because then you're adding in yet another touch point. So let's say you're promoting digitally with the event and on your own social channels right before the event. You're at the event, right? Somebody goes into the store at some point before or after the event, and they're like, oh, that's what I saw, right? It's a bit of a co-promotion that becomes a win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's really smart. It's like all the stars align for the consumer when you are looking at all those different angles at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so Andy has a question: how to find these races and events, and get in touch with people, especially for those smaller ones. What do you say?
You can call me. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Very candidly, like that's why I do it, because they're really hard to find unless you know about them. The most common complaint and what I experienced when I was on the brand side is that like I always found out about them too late. And it would be like, oh, how did I miss that one? Or my sales team would come to me like a week before and it's like, I need 5,000 t-shirts and I need, um, 300 brochures and whatever. And then it's going to cost, $25,000. And I'd be like, I didn't budget for this. I can't do it. And, you have to learn to say no. But at the same time, that problem persists and it persists for every brand. Most of the time, they're either annual events. So next year it gets put on your calendar or it shifts, right? Or you get an email, right? You can go Googling. Doesn't always work. You can target, like I want to do 5Ks. There's organizations with 5Ks. I want to do marathons. There's organizations with marathons. There's no guarantee. There's no full list. That's why I have a business, very candidly, Andrew, because there is no list. So I created a list. I created those relationships. And I work with brands to understand who their targets are. And I can match them to the events that actually match those targets. And then pull through like best practices I've seen at events otherwise to reach those targets so that you're not flying blind and having to deal with 5,000 organizers and emails from different organizers who need different things at different times all the way through to the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I've done some research on events too, and to Van's point, you want to be looking at places like events that are near where your product is sold, but you also want to be looking at the target audience that's showing up to those events. And yeah, there's a lot of variables there. So I know we're actually running out of time. I feel
Goodness.
it's gone by really fast.
Yeah.
But oh, here we go. There's another comment here. Grandma's Marathon in Duluth has a lower cost to entry for sample bags than other marathons. Oh, very cool. Andrea's talking about an event in Duluth, Minnesota. So yeah, definitely be on the lookout for those like smaller opportunities in local. Get your ear to the ground to some of those local places too. But I know Karen will be able to help with a lot of that because she has a really extensive collection of events with Sponsor Motion. So one other thing I wanted to cover before we leave, and definitely leave a note in the chat if there's something specific you want to ask Karen, but in the meantime, what is like some really interesting underserved like communities or like sporting, arenas or whatever that you feel like are ripe for activation?
Oh my goodness. I'll start with the communities. There's the bookends of the communities make me just like so happy, starting with youth sports. Youth sports are just like a gold mine of being able to reach people. And I don't mean like your weekend baseball game between like, your 10-year-old Pirates and your 10-year-old Mets team in town. I mean like these youth sports tournaments. Like there's ones that happen all over the country. They're huge. I was at the Boston Convention Center recently and they had like the high school volleyball championship and there were families from all over the region.
For the whole day or
For the
multiple
whole
days?
day, they've got goodie bags. They're bored in between matches. They're looking for things to do. They're looking for people to talk to. Advertising is plentiful at these events. And there are organizations we do work with that help you tap into those events cost effectively all over the country. The other side of the spectrum are the senior events. Now, when we think about seniors, right, I usually think about the little old ladies who can't leave their house, who wear house robes all day. But like, if we think about the boomer demographic, right, they're starting to age into the senior part of their life. They've got spending power. They're healthy. They're out there exercising and they want to maintain it. And most of them play sports. So there's now national senior leagues for golf, for like all sorts of kind of pickleball, tennis, you name it, they've got it. There's even like
Right.
an Olympic version of senior games.
Yeah, my aunt still races like ski racing up until
Oh
last
my
year.
God.
I mean, she is like in her 70s and she's in this masters like downhill racing league. And yeah, like it's such a cool concept because like like you said, we think of like, oh, old people, but like so
not.
many people are getting into this like older age range, but they're still active people and they're still participating in a lot of sports too, team sports.
Oh my God, absolutely, absolutely. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a boom in targeting for this demographic because they've got dollars and they want to live forever.
Wait, does that mean that I'm going to be in this demographic in 10 years? Yes.
Eventually, no, you won't be. I think in a few years more than that, but eventually we'll all be there.
Exactly. We'll all be there. And the people now, like all generations that are much more active now than previous generations, as they age, they continue to find ways to stay active. And so, yeah, there's like a lot of open space there.
And it's not a crowded space. And if it is crowded, it's crowded with like the insure type brands that are not what they want. They don't want to
Right.
feel old. They want to feel young. They're looking for that fountain of youth. And I think like many of these better for you products, it's super consistent with their brand offers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we actually talked about this earlier because I want to make sure I brought it up because you mentioned this before and I was like, yes, but they're also really a good like word of mouth funnel because people that are active that are older, they're talking a lot to each other and sharing ideas and communicating about some of their challenges or habits or hobbies or whatever. And so those older demographics might actually be some of the more better like words of mouth for
For
the
sure. The
sports event.
social networking, they tell each other everything, right? And they tell their kids everything. And I think that's what's different about the younger boomers than the older boomers is that they actually have really good relationships with their families. Think helicopter parents or ex-helicopter parents. And so not only are you getting them, you're probably also getting their families involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good call. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And if there's any other, I mean, Van has a question. How do you handle the greedy participants who take 5+ of the product? She says that happens a lot to her at events, and either you end up with too much product or you end up with people taking too much product. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so if you have one greedy person, I usually call them on it, like, hey, I've seen you before. Or you keep your product close so there's no theft. Again, sometimes I chalk it up to imitation is the best flattery, or theft is a hallmark of high demand, and your product is going to go somewhere, which is exactly what you want. If you're got too much at the end, then I think you might want to consider whether the event was right for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or was this not the right place to distribute product? It was inappropriate, or people didn't have a place to put it, which is often what I see. And they walk around with like, because there's no bags, like why do you have so much product? And then go backwards from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, cool. Well, I am like this hour flew by and I just think we came up with some really cool ideas and just like the beginnings of ideas for ways to engage at events. So hopefully this was valuable for you all. And if you have other questions or want to, look at maybe collaborating on event or tracking down the right events for you, Karen, what's a good way for people to connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email, karen.kareev@sponsormotion.com. I'm happy to chat through any ideas you have or connect you into any events that might be right for you. I I also am happy to connect you with other brands that may be looking to do similar things that you're doing, so you guys could partner up. That's, to me, the most fun part of it all.
Yeah, love that. I mean, we're all about that. Always love trying to find brands that align together and can share resources and ideas. And, you never know, maybe come up with some real clever thing that benefits everybody. So, yeah,
Well,
very
thank you
cool.
so much for having me. This has been super fun, and I look forward to connecting with many of you in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for joining us as well. And again, if you have any other questions, reach out to Karen, or feel free to contact me, kate@brandpollinators.com, and sign up for our newsletter at brandpollinators.com. And we'll keep you in the loop on any upcoming events that might be fun to do, collaborations, and other community calls in the future. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.